of the shift that matters, but how much time has occurred since the shift. So there's usually lags in returning to the equilibrium before the shock. So a great example of that, which your problem set will ask you to explore, is that drug demand through Mexico dramatically increased in the 1990s because the routes directly from Colombia to the United States got shut down by the US government. And that led, but then the Mexican government decided to crack down on this stuff, and this made trafficking drugs much less profitable. And competition also expanded, but violence has stayed really high. And the reason is that when the companies had invested all of this stuff in, getting ready to do the drug trade, they have all these violent people. When you then crack down on the profits they can earn, they just go into kidnapping and other violent activities rather than drug trafficking. And this is similar to what happened with paramilitaries. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I just have a question about how the government cracking down on drug production would make it less profitable. Because I would think that it would be sort of the other way around, where while it's difficult to do it, they would charge a higher price, something like that.
Yeah, I think that that's true, but I think that the thing is, it's so costly to get it past the government that soaks up most of the additional profits and makes it less profitable. Because there's so many people out there that you have to, ignore. Yeah, but that's a good point. A similar problem happened with the paramilitaries in Colombia. So after the war, they basically had all these people who had spent their whole lives fighting and being violent, and they ended up forming gangs after the war because they no longer had the war to fight in, right? So that shows that human capital invested in the ability to be violent takes actually a long time to depreciate. So people who become violent end up staying violent for a long time. Another example is there can be lags in getting to a post-shock equilibrium. So an example of that was that I think, probably the greatest relative demand for Google compared to other search engines was about 6 years ago. I think they're actually a little bit on the decline now. But still, they're growing enormously because it's just taken them a huge amount of time to build the corporate campus, recruit all the people, and so forth, to even really supply that demand efficiently, right? So it took a while to build up to that level, not just because they needed to recruit people, but because they needed to build a campus in which those people could work. And in order to do that, they needed to hire a construction company that could build that campus. And in order to hire the construction company, they had to hire recruiters. So there's many different layers of durables to even get up to the scale to be able to do that. There can also be lags in adjusting away from cyclicality. So as foreign exports and imports have become a bigger part of the U.S. market for agriculture, California has become much more cyclical because it can basically only compete with the foreign imports during the seasons where those foreign imports are not in season. So now during the winter, they're not really able to compete with Peru and Chile. And so it's become actually much more cyclical, the demand in California. And that's been a gradual process of them adjusting away from year-round agriculture to the cyclical process. So one example of this type of thing is, this is a graph of the cattle stock of the United States over history. And you'll notice it has these very regular cycles, right? Why does it have these very regular cycles? Well, the problem is, in order to have more cows that are big and plump that you can sell in the market, or they can reproduce, you need to actually not kill as many cows this year, so that they can grow up more, so they can reproduce more, so you can have more cows in future years, right? And so even if there's just a little bit of change in demand, it ends up creating these whole ripple cycles that come from, not having as many cows now, then you have more cows later, then those more cows later breed, more, and you get these very regular cyclical patterns just coming from sort of the time that it takes to adjust your production. Another important part is played by uncertainty. So suppose that the Xbox demand suddenly goes up a huge amount during Christmas, right? The natural response is for Xbox to like commission another Microsoft factory or another factory from another game producer to, even though that's more expensive than building their custom factories, to like build some more Xboxes just for the season, right? But if this persists a long time after Christmas, they're probably going to figure out that actually, oh, it might have looked like this was just Christmas demand, but actually it's going to last a lot longer. We should build our own factories. But they might not have noticed that as quickly as they would have if they weren't an industry which tended to have a lot of demand during Christmas. So if they were in an industry that was used to not getting a big demand spike during Christmas, they might have initially built the factories because they would have interpreted it as a longer-term demand shift. So confusion about past cyclicality can change your response to changes in demand conditions. And more generally, your past experience can influence your future interpretations. And this is, and this can mean that broader information, not just looking at what's going on in your market and your demand, but actually looking at the state of the whole economy or reading press, things can influence what you're going to do in response to demand shifts, because it helps you interpret whether they're just short run or whether they're long run. So Christian Hellwig has an important application of this, which is that in macroeconomics, people say that the prices that firms charge don't adjust enough to changes in the economic conditions, and that this leads to stickiness that causes business cycles. And the problem is that there really aren't enough costs of just physically adjusting your prices to justify that. This is a long puzzle that you probably learned about in macroeconomics, and you'll learn about more in the next terms. So another proposal that was made is that people might not have the information about what the market conditions are. But that's not really true either on its own, right? Because people can always see what's going on in their market individually. They can just see how much demand there is for their product. And so that supplies them the information they need. However, if you're in a market where you're used to having little transitory shifts in demand, and you suddenly see more demand for your product, you might not raise the price because you think that it's only going to last for a short period of time, even if you only have a small cost of changing your price, right? So if you're not able to get the information from the whole market that no, demand's actually shifting for a long time, that could lead to exactly this type of menu cost. Stickiness of prices. Okay, so far I've basically focused on durable inputs, even though I alerted you to the storable inputs before, but now I want to give you a really extreme counterexample. So oil is basically, can be costlessly stored in the ground and costs almost nothing to extract from the ground. So apparently the average fraction of the extraction costs and the bringing to market costs of oil is about 1% of its total value when brought to market. So it's almost free to take out of the ground. And what that means is that the price of the oil tomorrow has to be equal to the interest rate times its price today. Why? Well, Yvette, could you tell me why it has to be, why that equation has to hold?
Sorry, why the price of oil is equal to...
Why the price of oil in 3 years has to be equal to the interest rate that I could earn between now and then times the price of oil now.
Because is it to do with extracting oil being financially, it takes on, I'm not sure.
Cody, did you have a thought?
Well, you could either sell it for the price today, or you could store it and sell it for what it's worth tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that if you don't use the oil today, you could always sell it tomorrow. And if it grew slower than that, then you would want to sell all your oil today and just put the money in the bank. And if it grew faster than that, you'd want to keep all your oil right now and then take it out and borrow any money that you needed. And so what this means is that a temporary shock in the demand for oil, which raises only the price today, has basically no effect on the long-term price because all the prices have to be the same, right? Whereas a long-term shift doesn't change the production at all because there's just a certain amount in the ground. And so things are much, much more elastic in the short run than they are in the long run. And so that means that the effects of a carbon tax are only the timing of the carbon tax is going to matter. The actual level of it doesn't matter because in the long run it has no effect on the amount of oil that we consume. Anyways, I have one more slide but I won't get through it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. And try to take a look at the press coverage of Steve Jobs' obituary because it'll be